I'm Stephen Olson, and welcome to Spirit Basics. This is the show for everyone, from the beginner to the avid connoisseur of fine spirits.
And I'm Jennifer Allan. Today's show, we focus only on Scotch whiskey. Now, as if Scotland wasn't mysterious enough, I understand that there's two different kinds of Scotch whiskies. Can you tell us about them?
That's exactly right. There are what we call single malts, which have become very popular in North America in the last 20 years or so. And those are called in Scotland malt whiskies, and they have to be 100% barley. And then there are what we call blended whiskies, which the Scots call grain whiskies. And what we're going to do is break this into two episodes. It's just entirely too much information. So this week we'll talk about single malts, and on our next episode we'll talk about blended whiskies.
Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning for a minute. Can you give us a little history behind Scotch whiskey?
It's a great history indeed. The very word uscabeta, which is the root for the word that we use today, whiskey, is a Gaelic term, and we first see it in print in the 1400s, and of course it means, like all of our words in spirits, water of life. But we're quite convinced that distillation in Scotland predates that by at least a few hundred years, probably in the 11th or even 10th century. And if you think about these farmers in very remote places, a country completely surrounded by sea, very, very mountainous, these people began making beer, later learned about distillation, pot stills, alembic stills, and they created their own malts in their own places using the local water, using their own barley grain, malting it with the peat, which is a decaying biomass. Think of pre-coal, if you will, to burn in your fireplace, to cook your still, to malt your barley. The barrels in which we age it, the air around us, all of these things, and this wonderful grass, like clover, called a heather, which somehow magically even affects the whiskey itself.
Now, you called them single malts. Now, for all of us who don't know what that means, can you tell us?
Well, all the way back in the 1700s, when the English first imposed excise taxes on these poor distillers, these very remote farms, which had created their own whiskeys with a very singular taste, became moonshiners, illegal stills, if you will, and they never started sending it out. They kept it to themselves. So think of it as one whiskey or one malt in one place. And it's a fabulous story, but we'll explain more on that later on.
Well, for more great stories on Scotch whiskey, we turn now to our master mixologist, Dale Degroff.
My introduction to malt scotches was an accidental affair. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and my neighborhood bar was this, what I call affectionately, an old man's bar on Sunset Boulevard with a kind of a seafaring theme. And what I mean by an old man's bar is the owner's there behind the bar during the day. A lot of his buddies, retired guys, sit around all day long and chew the fat with him. And it's just an inexpensive hang, and that's why I was there, because I wasn't exactly in the chips. And I'm drinking my Dewar's one day and minding my own business, and I'm looking at the J&B and the Dewar's and the Cuddy, and then I see this white label, and I called the owner over and I said, "What, is that a Scotch? What is that there?" And he pulls the bottle off and slams the bar top, lets out a string of expletives, and I said, "Whoa, what's wrong?" He said, "This stuff, it's Lafroig," or, well, what he meant was Lafroig, one of the great smoky malt scotches. And he said, "I bought this stuff for this cameraman down at Sam Goldwyn Studios. The guy up and died on me. I had 10 bottles of it, and I can't give it away." So I said, "Well, give me a little taste of it." And boy, I took a taste and said, "Whoa, I see what you mean, pal." It was so smoky, it was like a campfire. And I'm like, but you know something? I ended up, over the 6 years that I lived in Los Angeles, drinking all 10 bottles of Lafroig, because he'd buy me one and then I'd buy one, and he'd buy me one and then I'd buy one, and I'd develop a taste for it. It's like sushi, it's like anything else, and it's adult taste, and you can in fact develop a taste for these kinds of scotches, and there's so many and so different. But malt scotch holds a really important place in the sort of evolving spirit industry, because I have to tell you, there's never been a more interesting time to be in the spirits industry than right now. And malt scotch was one of the reasons why. Because back in the 80s, they started releasing premium malt scotches, realizing that the premium, super premium market was growing and the value market was shrinking. So they started producing more of these super premium products, and a lot of these Scotchmen who used to sell their whiskey to blenders started bottling their own malt whiskey under their own label and selling it and making all the money themselves. And before you know it, by 2004, because in 1974 you had a choice of Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, and Lafroig, and that was it. 2004, you go to some bars now, you have a back bar with 100, 120, 130 malt scotches. It's become a phenomenon, and it's fueled an interest in cigars. It has inspired other spirits makers to go into the super premium category, whiskey makers, making their single barrel super premiums. It's really changed our industry a lot. But as far as cocktails, it's a tough mix. These smoky malt scotches. There are a couple cocktails, and I'm going to make one for you later on, that my friend Gary Reagan came up with, the debonair cocktail. But it's like tequila and mezcal. Tequila's a little easier to mix than mezcal is, and the same thing with the malts, as opposed to the Irish or the regular blended whiskeys. Anyway, malt scotch, an acquired taste. Yeah.
Up next, we'll take a moment to describe how the environmental and geographic conditions, as well as the distillation process, create these magical flavors in a glass of scotch.
And our Spirit insiders, Scott and Morgen, see what they can find out about Scotch whiskey. That's when Spirit Basics return. Welcome back to Spirit Basics. Right now we're going to talk about how single malt scotch is made. So tell us how the geography of all these remote areas affect the flavor of the scotch.
The geography has an immense amount to do with it because Scotland is indeed an island nation. It's also covered by mountains, which is why these farms are so remote, and a lot of water, often lochs, lakes, and rivers, some of it a little salty from the ocean itself. In the Highlands, if you think about the mainland itself, we have more of a heather, honey, very elegant style of whiskey, a lot of pear fruit. That's where we have Glenmorangie, Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, the Macallan. These are brands you certainly know. In the lowlands, a little bit lighter style, Auchentoshan, Glenkinchie. Don't forget, this is where the neutral grain spirits are made also for the blended whiskeys, which we'll talk about next week.
Now you said that Scotland's almost completely surrounded with water, but how does that affect the scotch, the flavor of the scotch from the islands?
Well, not only does that water affect all of the scotches on the mainland because of a slight brininess or a bit of peatiness, so forth, but on the islands themselves, they tend to be richer, fuller, smokier, sometimes bigger acidity so that they are great with food oftentimes. In the Isle of Islay, which is the most extreme and in your face, we have Ardbeg, Bowmore, Lafroig, Lagavulin, Bruichladdich, some of the great brands and the most age-worthy. Campbelltown's kind of a mixture of the best of both worlds of Ireland and the Highlands. That's where Springbank comes from. Talisker from the Isle of Skye, one of the most elegant whiskies with a bit of the island influence, but certainly a Highland malt. Orkney Islands has Highland Park, a very age-worthy whiskey. Oban from the Western Highlands, a bit of island influence, but a Highland malt. The bottom line is geography has a lot to do with it, but remember, Scotland is the epicenter for distillation in the world today.
Well, now for a more technical look at the process of distillation, we turn to our Spirit Guide.
If you want to make a single malt Scotch whiskey, you're going to have to make it from a single distillery. That's why we call it a single malt. And you're also going to have to make it from malt. In other words, malted barley. Indeed, what you're going to do is you're going to take that barley grain and you're going to trick it into believing it's spring. It's time to grow. So what it will do, it'll sprout in humid, warm conditions that it's in as you're trying to get it to malt. And in sprouting, it converts starches into sugars because it can use the sugar to grow. Well, now what you want to do is you want to stop that germination, and you do that by smoking the grain with peat, or at least roasting the grain. In the old days, peat was all we had. Peat, this chunk of earth, was the only fuel that was available to distillers to cook those grains and to stop that germination. And when we think about Islay single malt scotches, which are so smoky and so briny and have so much of that peat influence to them, the simple reason why they're that way is that the peat on the island of Islay is a lot wetter than the peat on the mainland. So of course it's a lot smokier. Today, actually, when you're on Islay, if you're ordering your barley malt, you'll order it with more smoke, so it smells like a typical Islay. At that point, you create a kind of wash, that's to say a sugar water solution. The yeast attack that, they turn it into a kind of beer, you distill that twice in a pot still. Now you have single malt Scotch whiskey.
Now that we've had a look at the history and the origins and the fascinating process behind these magical malts, it's time for an inside look.
And our roving Spirit insiders, Morgen and Scott, find out if cigars and single malt scotch really make the perfect combination.
Hey guys, we're here at the Chicago Chop House at the Cigar and Scotch event. Now the best pairing with scotch would have to be the cigar. Scott, what do you think of scotch?
Well, you know, they say whatever doesn't kill you only makes you stronger.
Let's go find out. Why is it that cigars and scotch go so well together?
Well, cigars have their own unique flavors, as well do whiskeys. Whiskeys come from three main areas in Scotland. There's the Highland, Lowland, and Islay whiskeys. All give off a different characteristical flavor, and you can actually match them up just like you can match up a food pairing with wine. Islay whiskeys usually come across as much stronger in peat flavors. Highland whiskeys are more floral by nature. Lowland whiskeys come across as a much softer whiskey. It's more subtle. It's very easy to drink.
Now, I've heard about dipping a cigar into the Scotch. Would you ever do that, or would you recommend that?
Not at $200 a bottle.
Now, I have to say, this guy looks like a cigar and Scotch drinking guy. What does it take to become that?
Practice?
Lots of it, I bet, isn't it?
Enjoyable practice.
So would you say that this is really for more of the older gentlemen? You know, I don't see any women here. Not yet at least.
It's a situation of, it's an acquired taste. There are a lot of women that do smoke cigars, right? And there's a lot of women that do drink scotches. It's just a fact that men seem to gravitate toward gentlemanly company.
Now, have you ever tried to pair a cigar with any type of other drink?
Usually I pair my beers with cigars. So with like a Cuban or a darker cigar, I'll go with a darker beer, and then vice versa for lighter cigars and lighter beers.
Now, how are you liking the difference pairing the cigar with the Scotch?
It's definitely an interesting experience. This is the first time for me, so it's definitely a new experience.
I don't know about you, Scott, but it sure is nice to get a breath of fresh air.
You know what, Morgan? I think I found myself a new hobby smoking these cigars.
Scott, that is gross. Back to you guys.
Well, if you didn't already know it, there is absolutely no doubt that cigars and single malt Scotch are a natural combination.
And up next, we continue our look into the world of single malt Scotch, how to drink it, and how to use it in some of your favorite cocktails. That's when Spirit Basics returns.
Spirit Basics is brought to you in part by Willow Park Wines and Spirits.
Welcome back to Spirit Basics, the show for everyone who wants to learn more about the world's great cocktails. It's time for us to take a closer look at how to enjoy single malt whiskey.
Now, earlier you were talking about all these different places and the type of malts, but how can you really identify what you're tasting?
Well, that was really a brief overview, and I'd like to explore it just a little bit more. When we talk about the great Highland malts, because of the water, because of the grain, because of the way it's malted, because of the choice of the peatiness, for the most part, and these are generalizations, but for the most part in a Speyside or Highland malt, and Speyside is actually an area within the Highlands, you tend to have very elegant whiskeys where the oak is a big influence. The heather itself seems to be a floral quality in the whiskey. The water, very spicy at times. In the lowlands, as I said before, a very light style of whiskey. Very pungent, very in-your-face, smoky, sea air, sea brine in the island malts with Islay, with Campbelltown, with Western Highlands, with the Isle of Skye, and even Orkney. And these places, in some cases, the barrel aging cellars are actually hanging out over the sea so that the waves literally lap up on the cellar and the sea air affects the whiskey itself. It's quite remarkable.
Wow, well, for more on how to enjoy a single malt Scotch, we turn to our Spirit Advisor.
You know, single malt Scotch is such a matter of preference. It really is, and it's your personal preference. Do you prefer that smoky, briny, powerful, intense character of the Islas? Do you prefer that softer, more elegant, certainly more floral character of a Speyside? I mean, it's up to you. Whatever you like is fine for you. That's why there's all these different single malt Scotches all over the place. And how you serve it, how you drink it, that's up to you too. Maybe you want to put it in a glass like this. I mean, this is a wonderful glass. I put my nose on this glass, and now I can find every little crook and cranny of aroma all around this glass. Other people like to use other glasses. Some people like to drop a little dollop of spring water in there. I've certainly, when I drink scotches, unless they're already cool like this one, I often like to put a single cube in there. And yes, I am a complete geek. I have cubes made of spring water in my fridge, so freezer, so I can actually drop a cube made of spring water inside there. And it does, people will argue that it opens up the Scotch. For my part, it's not something I normally do. I would rather that the Scotch already be cool and I drink it right out of the bottle. In fact, I even like to drink them, or at least taste them, nose them, straight out of the cask, even at cask strength, because I'm really trying to get everything I possibly can, out of that glass. Now, certainly, when I'm in Scotland, I've had people criticize my dropping a single cube in there, but most don't, because most realize it's really how you want to drink it that matters.
Well, our master mixologist, King Cocktail Dale Degroff, joins us now for a look at how to make a drink using single malt Scotch.
Malt whiskey was always a rough customer if you didn't get a chance to warm up to it. It's smoky, it's peaty, it's got flavor, it's aggressive in your mouth. There's nothing subtle about this kind of whiskey. And that's why it's a difficult whiskey to use, unlike Canadian whiskey, unlike American whiskey, which make easy cocktails. They don't overpower cocktails, they don't assert themselves so much. This stuff is really, really assertive. And I have a very assertive whiskey here, Ardbeg. Very peaty, very smoky. But my pals, Gary and Marty Reagan, who write cocktail books, came up with a cocktail called the Debonair cocktail, which I featured in my book, The Craft of the Cocktail. I liked it so much. And then the spirit that they used to accompany the malt whiskey was taken off the market, so I had to come up with an alternative. What they discovered is that you could mix with this smoky, peaty whiskey a ginger flavor. So what I've got myself here is some chunks of ginger in a confit, which I'm going to place in the bottom of my glass, along with a little ginger wine to make up for that ginger liqueur, which is no longer available. I'm going to muddle the confit of ginger in the ginger wine a little bit, get a lot of ginger flavor out, and then I'm going to add my smoky, peaty Ardbeg whiskey. And let's give it a try and see how it comes out. I've got a sweet ingredient, so I'm thinking I want to shake this drink rather than stir it. So I'm going to give it a good shake, and in the meantime, I want to chill my glass down. Even blended scotches are a little bit easier to cook with, I say cook as a cocktail maker, to make cocktails with, because they don't have such an assertive smoky flavor. Here we go. Let's shake it. I think it'll be better. And I don't think I can really find a garnish that would stand up properly to this drink, so I'm going to leave it ungarnished, unvarnished, just the way it is, and see how it comes out. And this is a bit of an experiment for me too, because I haven't tasted it made this way yet either. So let's see how we did. Ginger and smoke. Steve, Jennifer, remind me to make this one for you. Back to you.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt that single malt Scotch is a very singular taste and is an acquired taste. But when Dale works his magic on it, everybody will love it instantly.
I'm sure they will. After the break, we find out if we can cook using single malt Scotch. That's when Spirit Basics returns. Welcome back to Spirit Basics. We're in the kitchen with our Spirit Chef, Chef Allan. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Now today we're going to talk about cooking with Scotch. Now in particular single malt Scotch. Now there's so many different kinds of single malt Scotches with so many different kinds of flavors. How do you choose the right Scotch for your recipe?
Well, it's a terrible job, Jennifer, but The fact is you're going to have to taste them, and you're going to have to find the taste that you want. And it's one of the hard things about being a chef is to go into the bar maybe after you're done in the kitchen and sit down and taste some of these things. But you really want to, because they are really diverse, and probably more than any other spirit we're going to talk about in this show, this is almost like wine. It depends on where it comes from. You know, wines have their terroir, so do scotches. And so you really have to know what you're getting when you're buying it, and the only way to do that is to open up a bottle and sip it.
So you're going to find that some scotches are more peaty, others are more smoky. How does that translate into your recipe?
Well, almost directly with this spirit, and that's the interesting thing about Scotch, is that if you're going to use it for cooking, unlike some of the other things that maybe are lighter or don't have much of a flavor or don't add much texture, Scotch really does. So you're going to have to taste what you're finding in the Scotch, and then it'll translate almost directly into the dish, because once the alcohol's gone, you're actually going to retain an awful lot of the Scotch taste.
Okay, well, we've got a couple of examples right in front of us. Can you tell us what we have here?
Well, what we have here is a good example of what you're going to use to cook with Scotch. Gone are the chicken and the white fishes and things like that. What we've done here is we've got actually what is a version of Welsh rarebit, which is a cheese dish. We've got Scotch rarebit, where we've actually added some spirit in the form of some single malt Scotch into a cheese mixture, which we've then broiled and put on bread. And it's got a really, really deep, beautiful taste. Goes really well with the cheese. And again, we're into this situation where what you want is you want something that can hold the flavor of the Scotch. We've got a pan-seared steak. Now, you may say, well, why pan-seared? And the reason is, in this recipe, you add the Scotch directly to the pan after you take the steak out, and you scrape away all those good bits, add some mushrooms, and you're going to get a really nice, deep Scotch taste, and it's going to be perfect with that kind of meat.
Now, we've heard Stephen say, throughout all of our episodes that you want to use premium ingredients for premium cocktails. I guess the same holds true for recipes as well.
It's like cooking with wine. You wouldn't cook with a wine you wouldn't want to drink. It's the same with Scotch. You can't use a bar Scotch for these recipes.
Well, if you'd like to make any of these recipes at home, all you have to do is log on to our website. Over to you now, Stephen.
Thanks, Jennifer. You know, Scotch whiskey is great with food and in food. Well, that's it for this edition of Spirit Basics. On our next episode, since we've broken down single malt, we'll take a closer look at blended Scotch whiskey. This is Stephen Olson for Jennifer Allan and the entire team here at Spirit Basics. See you next week. Slante.
Special thanks to Willow Park Wine & Spirits, whose dedication to providing knowledge, awareness, and service to their customers has made this show possible.